Hey, I'm Laura Siemens and welcome back, and we are doing the Bible study and we are in Daniel, and now we're all the way up to Daniel chapter 6. So go ahead, if you're just starting now, you want to go back, you definitely want to see the 5 videos that came before this for Daniel chapter 1 to chapter 5. And so now we are on chapter 6 and it's getting really good. When we left off, you remember that the Jews had gone, they've been taken captive, they went to Babylon, and then they were in Babylon, and now Babylon's been taken captive by the Medes and the Persians. And remember we talked about how the whole reason that the Jews are captive, and they're going to be captive for 70 years, and the whole reason that they're captive is that God wanted to have his people turn back to him because they had begun worshiping false gods, and they were not doing things God's way anymore. And so they're in a 70-year timeout, but God has the whole time created an atmosphere where they can once again worship him. An atmosphere that they didn't even necessarily have when they were back in Israel, because they were not following after God when they were there. So remember under Nebuchadnezzar, that God showed, after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow, that God showed his power and he rescued them. And then King Nebuchadnezzar had said nobody was allowed to say anything bad about their God. And so that had created a way for them to begin to look back at who God was and really turn their hearts back to God. And then also King Nebuchadnezzar had written a letter after he had also turned his heart back to God, and he had sent that out. And so during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, there had definitely been an atmosphere for people to turn back to God, for the Jewish people to do that. And then we had, now they're being taken captive again, and this time they're being taken captive by the Medes and the Persians. So there's 2 kings whenever we talk about the Medes and the Persians. So there is King Darius, and then some people say King Darius. It's the same person, depends on how you pronounce it. And I kind of go back and forth. So sometimes I might say Darius, and sometimes I might say Darius, because I've heard it both ways my whole life. So I kind of pronounce it both ways. But that is the Medes. And then we have members of the Medes and the Persians. And so under the Persians, we have King Cyrus. So we have 2 kings, King Darius, Medes, and then King Cyrus, who is the Persians. And so remember that way back in chapter 2, we have the kingdoms that are going to rule the world. So we have Babylon, and then we have the Medes and the Persians. And that's where we are right now, the Medes and the Persians. So at this point, they are the most powerful nation on earth, and they are basically controlling everything. Okay, so King Darius, he decides he's going to have a bunch of people who are going to be governors, and they are going to oversee things. And this way he's going to make sure that the Babylonians are submissive to the Medes and Persians. So one of the governors that he puts in charge is Daniel. And that doesn't really go over well with the governors that he has at that time, because they're looking at Daniel and they're thinking, this is a captive of a captive. Like, this is a slave of a slave. Like, why are we giving this guy power? So like, they really, really hate him, and they're really jealous of him. Now, King Darius actually becomes really good friends with Daniel and really likes Daniel. And so that makes the other governors even more angry with him, and they decide they need to get rid of him. So they begin following him around and trying to find anything that they can see that he's doing against the law that's illegal. So they're following him around and they're looking for a way to ruin his reputation, and they can't find anything because he does everything the king tells him to do, and he's loyal to the king. So remember, he's not only he's a Jewish person, and then he's taken by Babylon, and now he's taken by the Medes and the Persians, and he is all the way through, he has been loyal to the king that he is under, and at the same time loyal to God. And that is a really important thing for us to think about, that yes, we need to do things the way God wants us to do things, but at the same time we need to follow the laws of the land, and that is what Daniel did. So they could find nothing. They could find nothing to say bad about him. But they did notice that there was one thing that he did every single day. And every single day, he would open his window and look towards Jerusalem, and he would pray. And he would do that 3 times a day. So remember way back in chapter 1 that he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. And so through all of the things that he has gone through, at this point, he would be quite old, he was still praying and still looking back towards Jerusalem and thinking about his youth and about God that he had served all this time. So he had not given up on that. So they realized there was no way anything was going to change him from giving that up, from praying 3 times a day and by looking towards Israel when he did that. So they come up with a plan. So what these guys do is they go to King Darius and they say, we think you should make a law that no one can worship anybody except you for 30 days because you are so great. Now remember, this is somebody, the Medes and the Persians taking over the Babylonians. So it would actually be kind of a way of making sure that all of the people now are kind of moving their loyalty over from Babylon to the Medes and the Persians, right? And so this, I could see how he would get tricked into doing this. Not to mention the fact that a really good way to trick people into doing things is by telling them how amazing they are. Because people stop thinking critically when you start bribing them or telling them how awesome they are. So that's how a lot of times bad people get you to do things, by either bribing you or by telling you how awesome you are, so you stop thinking. So that's what he does. He passes this law. Now, after he passes this law, what do the men do? They go and they stand under Daniel's window because they know that he is going to pray. And then they wait. And then if you think about it, it was only 30 days. It wasn't for forever, right? So Daniel could have said, well, I'm going to pray and just not open my window like I always do. I'm going to just do it secretly. But he doesn't. He does it openly. He openly defies this order. And this is somebody who, remember Daniel from the very beginning, from ever since the end of chapter 1, he keeps getting promoted and he keeps moving up higher in politics, right? So he understands how politics works. He's not a fool. So he knows exactly what he's doing at this point when he opens that window and he's praying publicly, that he's defying the order that the king has made. So he is, he's doing what God wants him to do. He's praying, but he's also telling the king openly that I will serve you and I will do the things you want me to do, but I will not worship you. I will still be worshiping God. So the king finds out because these men are watching him, so they go tell the king right away. And as soon as they tell the king, then the king realizes that he's been tricked. But there's a law that says if the king makes a decree, that no one can change it, not even the king. So since he made this decree, he can't change it because he put on the stamp from the Medes and the Persians. So it's law and it can't be changed. So he has to kill Daniel. The king has to kill Daniel because that was the law. So what does he do? He takes Daniel and he brings them to the lion's den. And he says here, this is verse 16, so the king gave the command and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid in the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, and the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. So right here you can see that Daniel has already talked to the king about God and about how powerful God is. So right here, as he's throwing in the lion's den and then he puts the rock in front of it, he's saying, I really hope that everything you've told me about God is true. And I really hope he's going to be protecting you. So the king then goes back to his room and he spends the entire night pacing. He won't eat, he won't drink. He's like freaking out because his friend is probably being eaten by lions and it's his fault. The next morning, he goes down to see Daniel. So we can see that he is hoping that everything that Daniel has told him about God is true. So they move the stone out of the way and then he calls down to Daniel and Daniel answers him. And Daniel says, listen, you know that I did nothing wrong and you know I did not deserve to be thrown down here into this lion's den. But God protected me and God sent an angel to come down and close the mouth of the lions so that I would not be harmed. So they take Daniel, they pull him out of the lion's den, and then the king goes on to talk about how amazing God is. And so he makes a decree. It says here that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So you can see here that again, what is God doing? So now the Medes and the Persians are in charge. And once again, God is setting up an atmosphere for the Jewish people where they can, not only can they worship God freely, but anyone else who says anything bad about God is going against the king. So once again, they are being set up, once again, for success, so that they can turn their hearts back towards God. But what happened to those governors who had planned this whole attack on Daniel? Well, the king realizes that they can't be trusted, and so he takes them and throws them into the pit, and the lions eat them, so they all die. Then what happens after that is that Daniel is again promoted, and he moves up in the ranks as the Medes and the Persians continue to rule. So that is how chapter 6 ends. So go back, read chapter 6, and you know what? If you like, I like memorizing parts of the Bible, because to me, when God says to meditate on the Bible day and night, I can't actually walk around with my Bible in front of my face day and night, but when you memorize it, then you can be thinking about those words day and night. So if you want to memorize this section, Daniel chapter 6, verse 26 and 27, those are two great verses to memorize, so you can meditate on them day and night. I'm Lorelei Siemens, and you're watching Bible Study, and that was Daniel chapter 6.